Finally, a video on New Age spirituality. I've been waiting for this, searching for this video, but finally someone has released a video on it. One day ago, Religion for Breakfast did this video on New Age spirituality, which kind of really gets into the history and kind of lets you know what it's all about and where it's going. I've only seen the first little bit. I didn't want to spoil it for the reaction. It's a little bit of a lengthy one. So we won't keep you guys waiting. Let's get into it.
In 1987, a miniseries called Out on a Limb aired on the American TV channel ABC. The show is based on the best-selling autobiographical book by actress and author Shirley MacLaine. It explored MacLaine's spiritual journey into beliefs like reincarnation, spirit channeling, and meditation, and her quest for finding a deeper, more meaningful life. It's now widely understood as a quintessential example of New Age spirituality. But what makes Out on a Limb New Age? From energy healing and polarity therapy to astral projection, crystals, aura reading, astrology, and chakra balancing, the term New Age encompasses a seemingly impossibly huge array of beliefs and practices. New Age is often thrown around as a vague term for the weird, as one Washington Post author put it back in the 1980s. Back then, and still today, many use the term New Age as a shorthand way to refer to any belief or practice considered to stand outside normal or mainstream religion. Now, religious studies scholars are more careful when trying to define it, but there is an ongoing challenge when studying the New Age to figure out what exactly we're talking about. Scholars generally use New Age spirituality to refer to a loosely cohesive cluster of beliefs and practices characterized by eclecticism and individually oriented practice. Personal experience is central, and there are many physical and mental practices that people use for achieving higher levels of consciousness, a feeling of oneness with the universe, centeredness in nature, or removing negative energy and cultivating positive energy. Though one particular scene in Out on a Limb can help us understand the New Age movement. In this series, Shirley MacLaine befriends this guy, David, a character representing all of her spiritual guides rolled up into one person. At one point, David and Shirley are sitting on the beach, and David explains that the reason people struggle to love themselves is because they don't truly know who they authentically are.
That's what all the masters have tried to help us with.
What masters?
You know, Christ, Buddha, the Indian avatars. They were really just master politicians who went right to the root of the problems in society, the individual.
Here David is expressing what religious studies scholars call perennialism, the idea that all of the world's religions share a foundational wisdom and truth. In this case, the truth that everybody is part of God. The kingdom of heaven is within us. But David says that unfortunately this can take multiple lifetimes to come to that simple realization. At which point Shirley asks,
Why isn't reincarnation in the Bible? Why isn't it taught in Christianity?
Reincarnation comes into the conversation, and David shares a pseudo-historical story that the Roman Emperor Justinian and the Church suppressed reincarnation because it implied that individuals needed to take responsibility for their own karmic destiny. Shirley responds that if she truly believed in reincarnation and karma, truly believed that everything she puts out into the universe would come back to her someday, she would be convinced that she is completely responsible for everything that happens in her life. The conversation culminates in David encouraging Shirley to affirm her divine nature by repeating again and again the affirmation, I am God.
I am God.
I am God.
I am God, an affirmation helping her fully embrace her own divinity. In this 4-minute conversation, we encounter several foundational concepts that characterize the New Age movement. Perennialist philosophy, the idea that a universal truth underlies all the world's religions. An emphasis on individualism, self-divinity, and self-empowerment. Belief in Asian religious practices like karma and reincarnation. Anti-establishment critiques of mainstream religions like Christianity. 4 historical streams came together in the 1960s and 70s that made this scene possible. Western esotericism, the New Thought movement, the American youth counterculture of the 60s and 70s, and the Americanization of Eastern philosophies and religion. 4 historical streams that we need to understand in order to understand the New Age. Western esotericism and 19th century occultism are precursors to the New Age movement, especially theosophy, a philosophical and religious synthesis of several occult and esoteric traditions that was founded in New York City in 1875 with the establishment of the Theosophical Society. A core concept of theosophy is that beneath the surface of all this diversity, there is a foundational wisdom and truth at the root of all the world's religions, which, as I mentioned, is called perennialism. Theosophists blended concepts from Neoplatonism and Hermeticism with elements from Asian religions like Buddhism and Hinduism, like the concept of karma. These ideas carried forward for decades and inspired dozens of philosophical and religious movements, including the New Age. Believing in perennial wisdom lends itself to eclectic, individualized religious practice because it blurs the line between distinct categories like Buddhism, Hinduism, and Christianity. In other words, everything is up for grabs. You don't need to decide which religion is true and which is not, because truth is in every single one of them, and you can individually identify the truth in each wisdom tradition for yourself. Now, as we'll see later, this becomes a major part of the eclecticism and individuality of New Age practice. One of the most influential theosophists important to the history of the New Age movement was Alice Bailey. She foresaw an imminent era of peace and love, and based her reasoning on astrology. According to some astrologers, Earth would soon shift from the Piscean age to the Aquarian age. This means that during the spring equinox, the sun will rise in front of the zodiac sign Aquarius instead of Pisces. A changing of astrological houses, or a new age, only occurs roughly once every 2100 years or so, and astrologers today don't even agree on whether or not we have entered the Aquarian age. According to Alice Bailey, the age of Aquarius was a reason for hopeful expectation, the expectation of an enlightened time when brotherhood and spiritual energy would dominate. And her ideas shaped the New Age movement later on in the 60s. For example, the famous Woodstock Music Festival in 1969 was originally branded as an Aquarian exposition. The opening song of the countercultural musical Hair was titled Aquarius, and included the refrain, "This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius." We also see this expectation of a new age in the book The Aquarian Conspiracy, by the prominent New Age thinker Marilyn Ferguson. Published in 1980, this book became a key text in defining and popularizing the New Age. She characterized the New Age as a conspiracy, in the sense of a peaceful revolution driven by a loose network of people united in bringing about collective awakening and a shift in consciousness toward a more enlightened and interconnected world. Ferguson was articulating a common idea in the 70s and 80s that an elect few will bring about this transformation, an idea that again stretches back to Alice Bailey. Bailey believed that small groups of people, what she called an oligarchy of elect souls, would awaken to this new age and help guide people towards spiritual enlightenment and a harmonious world order. Decades later in the 1970s, some started to believe in a generation of so-called indigo children, people believed to possess special and often supernatural abilities that are destined to bring about a transformation in human consciousness and society. In his book Revelation, The Birth of a New Age, the New Age thinker David Spangler introduced the concept of seed people, special individuals scattered throughout society, quietly influencing and preparing the ground for the coming New Age. So initially, the New Age emerged as a form of millenarian discourse, which means the expectation of a near-future transformative period, like a 1,000-year reign or a utopian era. In this sense, the New Age initially referred to an expectation of a literal New Age. Some New Agers interpreted this more radically, believing that the New Age meant a coming cataclysm, like what you would read in the book of Revelation, earthquakes, famines, and floods. Others were more moderate, saying that the New Age will involve a spiritual changing for humanity. Others argued that the New Age had already begun and we just don't realize it yet. Now, while this was a big deal in the 60s and 70s, eventually the millenarian aspect of the New Age faded a little bit. It never completely disappeared, though. For example, some of you might remember the expectation around the end of the Maya calendar in December 2012. Many people inspired by the New Age movement interpreted this as inaugurating a new era of spiritual consciousness or a global transformation, and people even gathered at Maya archaeological sites to celebrate the event. But the millenarianism of the New Age eventually took a back seat to a focus on healing, manifestation, self-development, and health-oriented practices, which...
It makes sense. Like, any ancient religion that's around long enough, eventually you're going to see some changes no matter what. Nothing seems to be, unchangeable. Like, if we saw Christianity, let's even say 100 years ago, I'm sure in Western cultures it looked way, way different than what it looks now. It feels way different from the 80s when I remember. Because, it seems that, we change as people. Our environment changes, we develop things. And the understanding of these religions, it seems to make sense that people would start, taking things that they seem useful from certain religions and turning it into something else that benefits them or that they simply just like about it. They're like, I like this. I like how it makes me feel. I feel like I'm getting somewhere with this. But then again, that can become something in itself that, can become destructive if you use it too poorly. I think part of the hippie and 70s movement, there was a lot of good things that happened there, but there might have been, say, some people might have said that it was too reckless, right? That it led, all the free love and stuff led to, STDs or something negative, right? I don't know. What do you got to say on this?
When babies are born, they're these malleable things with soft skulls that squeeze their way through the birth canal, and then they're when they come out, and they get slapped by the doctor, so or they used to anyway, on the butt, so they can breathe, and it's very painful for the mom. And you think of a mollusk type thing outgrowing its shell, and it's painful. And I see that in the development of humanity. You see all kinds of bizarre things, like people rocking back and forth and doing all kinds of just weirdness for weirdness sake. But there's some weird truth in there.
Yeah.
When we were at the cottage and I was meditating like crazy, I was doing this auto exorcism thing, but which I thought I coined the term auto exorcism, and upon only after thinking of things in that term, like exorcising these demonic feelings and thoughts out of myself, did I realize that was a term talked about for a long time in stuff. And one of the peculiar things that happened during that time was I got visions of these eyes, like these very distinct eyes looking at me, like, I don't know how to explain it, but I knew it if I saw it. And then shortly afterwards, I found a video about a guru talking about a deity in Hinduism called Devi or Deva. I should know the name because it was so significant. And I was like, that's the eyes that were kept peering at me when I was doing this detox exorcism thing. Yeah. And so with all these crystals and everything, sometimes I want to poke fun and be like, why is there like a uniform for being a hippie? You know what I mean? And another thing that I would say is interesting is the elitism, the tendency towards elitism. We're seeds. Are you a galactic neon seed?
Yeah.
Because we're the special, the word special and all this stuff. Not to say that no one's special, whatever that means. But I'm saying in all of it, and all the peculiar and weirdness and everything like that, if you just stand back and you don't think, well, am I part of this? Do I judge this? Do I hate this?
Yeah.
You see a process. And you could look at a birth and go, what a grotesque horror situation. This thing slithers out of another human and the mom's screaming and the baby's screaming. But you could also look at it and you could go, this is then, shortly after the mom's holding the baby and it's very sweet. And so all our labels, this is good and that's bad and this is right and that's weird and this is that, they kind of cloud the objective view of everything in a sort of label-less realm where you just look at it. You just regard it without words, But it's you want to say things like, this is good. And I think some good things happen from that. And I think some bad things happen from that. And it's like, are clouds bad, as they morph from one shape to the other? Are volcanoes bad, really? Are they bad? They react and we react to them and there's reactions going on. And some of it gets pretty weird, and some of it you put out of your mind because you're like, that's too bizarre, that's too crazy, let me explain that away, let me Sherlock Holmes that so that there's like a logical explanation that aligns with something I already thought was going on. The root of all this stuff, especially spirituality, is you can start to see an interconnectivity to all these activities. You can start to see some overarching theme at the root of it,
Well, you definitely, when looking at it, I'm feeling like they're onto something.
Yeah, they're onto something, and
they've picked up something here
and they're doing their best to do it. You don't look at when they're rocking and they're getting crystals and they're changing their costumes and all this stuff. They are trying to get to something, and even when it becomes political and they're like, "Well, you're in that hippie camp and I'm in this hippie camp," there's still process. There's still that outgrowing that shell, and what are they trying to get to?
Yeah.
You wouldn't look at a toddler toddling around and be like, "Idiot! Why doesn't he know how to walk already? He just fell over and hit his head." That's bad. He's got a bad process in learning how to walk.
Yeah.
He's learning how to walk through all kinds of means and reasons.
just like everything, and I do mean
crawl,
and I do mean
whatever.
Everything, it has the ability to be exploited. And so,
but that's part of it too. So
Yeah.
imagine looking at something and being like, that guy's exploiting that guy.
Yeah.
Bad.
Yeah.
And I know this is very frustrating. This is it's one thing to discuss hippiedom and the politics of hippiedom or the politics of merchandising, selling crystals or selling tarot cards or selling this. It's one thing to have a surface level, like chess game of a conversation between it. And I know that it's very difficult to go, what if you could even see the camps that are forming and see that some people are getting exploited and go, well, of course that is part of the process too.
Yeah.
How many exploiters must a man exploit before he's like, I can't exploit anymore?
Yeah. Well, maybe the whole thing is that one day we'll exploit ourselves so much that we'll say, let's get rid of the ability to exploit. Let's ditch money.
What if it's
Or
not
like,
that's?
I'm just saying.
I know,
maybe,
but I'm saying, look at the mind's desperate attempt to do this. Like even if you do kind of take this sort of whatever I'm pointing at here, people will be like, well then. Like you know as well as I do that there's plenty of people that are like, well, what if it leads to the end of the world? What if it leads to atomic fallout? And I'm like, well, then why are you practicing spirituality of all things? Forget spirituality then if you're worried about atomic bombs. Why don't you build the world into a mega prison where bad guys, whoever they are, can't do things? But of course, you'd have to deny all the horrendous, heinous atrocities that you do, that any of us do. And you go, I don't do those atrocities. And then it devolves into an endless list of things. Yeah. My suggestion in lieu of all this, okay, and I know it's out there and we'll get back to the video in a sec, is instead of trying to understand this at some like rational level, try to regard it at some deeper, like just observant level, unlike what I just did.
Just let it go for a while.
Which leads us to the second historical stream leading to the New Age, what's called the New Thought movement. Now, we talked about this in our video on the practice of manifesting, or the belief that your thoughts and intentions can bring about reality. New Thought was a diverse collection of practitioners in the 1800s and early 1900s whose work focused on the concept that each individual contained the divine spirit. This spirit was universal and made of the same stuff as God, or a universal power. Some branches of New Thought focused on stuff in a very literal sense. That spiritual matter was physically inside of you, which could be manipulated by using the powers of the mind to heal illness or energetic imbalances in your body. For example, figures such as Franz Anton Mesmer believed that the root of sickness lay in a magnetic fluid. Mesmer's practice of manipulating this hypothetical fluid is where we get the word mesmerize. And some scholars think that his fluid hypothesis laid the groundwork for how New Age thinkers conceptualize energy as a dynamic and malleable force often tied to health and well-being. Another key figure was Phineas Quimby. Originally a mesmerist, he eventually rejected the fluid hypothesis in favor of the idea that thoughts themselves could heal all sickness. Ideas like this led to what we now call holistic or mind-body medicine, which at the time was called mind cure. Mind cure swept through the US with the idea that the mind and body are connected, and your thoughts could affect your physical health. And decades later, we now have a constellation of self-help and therapeutic beliefs and practices commonly linked to the New Age movement, like the power of positive thinking, the law of attraction, and manifesting. In 1982, the New Age writer Shakti Gawain published Creative Visualization, a manual of techniques for manifesting the life of your dreams. By visualizing in your mind a clear idea or feeling of something you want, you can manifest it in your life, whether it's money, fame, or health. Affirmations, or strong positive statements that something is already as you want it to be, are a key practice in manifesting. For example, chanting the phrase, "I am a magnet for miracles," helps attract miracles to you. Shirley MacLaine was a huge popularizer of affirmations back in the 1980s, which we already saw with her chant, "I am God." We also see echoes of the New Thought movement when MacLaine declared that the law of karma means that she is completely responsible for everything in her life. This is a key theme in the self-help book genre and all the consumer goods that go along with it. Self-help is based on our ability to perfect ourselves to reach our highest cosmic potential. We can change ourselves for the better no matter our circumstances. This was shared by other self-help authors like Louise Hay, declared Queen of the New Age by the New York Times Magazine. In her 1984 bestseller, You Can Heal Your Life, Hay listed out the points of her philosophy, one of which being the notion that we are 100% responsible for all of our life experiences. Now, going back to the 1800s, as mind cure was gaining popularity, the academic field of psychology was also gaining traction, and some of these early ideas formed the basis of New Age worldviews. For example, a lot of you probably know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which visualized human needs as a pyramid with self-actualization at the top, the desire to be the most that one can be. New Agers linked self-actualization to achieving higher consciousness, or expanding the mind's ability to understand truth. This led to psycho-spiritual enhancement programs and institutes, like the Human Potential Movement, the Esalen Institute, and Erhard Seminars trainings, better known as EST. So, ideas from the New Thought era shaped a worldview that later became a foundational pillar of the New Age movement, a worldview that emphasized personal experience and individuality, what we could call self-spirituality. The sociologist Paul Heelas explains that self-spirituality emphasizes personal experience and recognizing that the self is a spiritual being connected to all other beings. Again, an idea that we saw echoed in that conversation between David and Shirley on the beach. This emphasis on self-spirituality, self-improvement, and therapeutic spiritual practices helped to shift the New Age movement from a form of supernaturalistic apocalypticism to what scholars call a this-worldly humanism that was all about human potential and self-actualization. Which leads us to the third historical stream of the New Age movement. The American counterculture of the 1960s and 70s, a period of American social, cultural, religious, and political upheaval where the New Age movement actually all began. So what was the countercultural movement countering? Well, normie culture, or the ideas and institutions that were considered normal, expected, and traditional for their time, particularly for white middle-class society. In the post-World War II era, this meant supporting progressive political issues. Countercultural youth, better known as hippies, supported the civil rights movement, gay rights, environmentalism, second-wave feminism, and sexual liberation. They also emphasized spreading peace and love, and they were vehemently opposed to the ongoing Vietnam War. It also meant saying no to the military-industrial complex, traditional gender roles, nuclear families, and corporate jobs, as well as patriotism, anti-communism, and saying no to the religions that they had grown up with, primarily mainline Protestantism and Catholicism, but also Judaism to a somewhat lesser extent. The 60s and 70s saw an explosion in a bunch of alternative beliefs and practices that eventually fell under this category of New Age. Just to name a few: meditation, postural yoga, Indian Ayurvedic medicine, chakra balancing, acupuncture, Reiki, mystical journeys with the help of psychedelic drugs, appropriating and reinventing indigenous sacred ceremonies, creating home altars, aura reading, spirit channeling, astrological and tarot card reading, and using crystals, essential oils, and incense for their energetic properties. Like I said, just to name a few. Scholars of religion consider this religious explosion of the 60s and 70s as a result of the countercultural ethos, the result of the baby boomer generation rejecting mainstream religions and embracing spiritual seeking. These practices were often viewed as alternative spiritualities defined in opposition to mainstream culture and religion. Remember David's pseudo-historical story about Emperor Justinian suppressing the belief in reincarnation. The New Age movement emphasized personal insight and interpretation of the truth versus received dogma. Much of this anti-dogmatism was directed toward Christianity, and pre-Christian or non-Western traditions were valued instead. The scholar Dr. Margareta Love writes, "The pre-Christian religions tend to be portrayed as more authentic, tolerant, and harmonious and in tune with the natural state of humanity and the earth than the dominant paradigm of the Piscean Age." As individuals embraced these diverse teachings and created their own spiritual beliefs and practices, they engaged in what the scholar Paul Heelas calls detraditionalization, which means rejecting the voices of authority associated with the established orders. Detraditionalization stems from the idea that the individual is the highest authority, over and against long-standing traditional authorities, even to the point of seeing oneself as divine. Again, we saw this attitude on display with Shirley MacLaine declaring, "I am God." Though we also see it in the purpose statement of the countercultural magazine The Whole Earth Catalog. We are as gods, and might as well get good at it. In mid-20th century America, these were pretty radical statements. Detraditionalization explains the seemingly endless variety that we see within New Age spirituality. It indicates that those with a New Age mindset feel perfectly comfortable mixing, matching, and discarding ideas or symbols from any religious tradition. So you might come across someone who believes that their life is guided by astrological influences, practices yoga purely as an exercise instead of a Hindu devotional practice, and wears a cross or a Hamsa necklace, all without any contradiction. The countercultural ethos infused the New Age movement with a believing without belonging mindset.
Man, oh man, I jive with the New Age movement, but this is like a political correct person's or hyper rationalist's nightmare.
You know, I really like the imagery. So creative, to be in some of those situations.
Yeah.
First of all, it would be very exciting and cool. But on the other hand, I get a sense of how scary it would be. And you know what? Some of this does. It puts me in check in my ranty, aggressive nature. I'm like, I gotta calm down. Because you can imagine that these are all just people too. And unless they're fully awakened people, they're walking around with preferences and possibly paranoia about people. You know, let's go freak out the normies, man. You know, we gotta get this we got to learn it quick, even if we got to get, weaponry to like defend our hippie beliefs. It so easily turns into that.
Yeah.
So that now I have so much reverence for like people that maintain a calm demeanor, for God's sake. And you might see more of that. I'm sorry if you like to see me fly off the handle and rant, but as the years go by, I'm like, it's just, maybe it's better to just be calm and patient with people. Because these hippies, we all know what happened. The 70s rolled around, then the 80s rolled around.
Yeah.
All the way today. And we still have hippies and everything. And a lot of progress, of course, stayed.
Yeah.
But the attitude of like, once you find something like, this is so beautiful, now I have to defend it to death.
Yeah.
Now I got to is frightening, or like, you better get it in check, or this criticism of people that are traditional.
Yeah. It's fun to just watch how it's kind of all evolving, right? Because the hippies of today aren't the hippies of yesterday. They're different because you've got technology and more information is provided, so everyone's better educated. They're less willing to do certain things and more willing to try other things and experiment with stuff. And it's, from an outsider, like looking in, it's fun to watch it. It's fun to watch it all go. It's even fun to see how traditionalism is evolving, even though they might swear like it's the same thing. It's not. I'm sorry to break it to you, man, but it's not the same as it was. Even though, like, I'm watching like Christian YouTubers and how their messages and the way that they carry themselves and present themselves, it's all different, man. Go watch some 80s, 70s, 60s Christian services. It's not the same thing, man.
Right.
Not the same.
I think there's probably still churches where all the women wear hats in church.
Yeah.
But there may have been a time earlier on where like you hide your hair. You don't want to tempt anybody. You know what I mean? Yeah. And like every single man, woman, and every single man and child is like in a suit, and women got a hat on, and you mind your P's and Q's. Yeah. And then
there is something scary about letting go, knowing that something will not, like, all these things will pass away. Even the stuff we're looking at here, it'll all pass away. It will all go.
Yes, that is brilliant, because once you learn to embrace change, like, you look at these guys and they look like they're imitating Jesus, quite frankly. They got like long hair and a bit like, I am like, you Christians don't understand. I was really with Jesus. Watch some videos of me a couple of years ago. Yeah. I had long hair and a long, you know what I mean? I've been wearing only Hawaiian shirts. Yeah. Like, it's something fun to it. If you look at it as like, they're going through this, they're having fun. Every identity gets old and you get bored of it. And you're like, all those hippie guys probably got to a point where they're like, F this long hair, I'm sick of it, having to deal with it, you know what I mean? And every identity you take on,
even if you like about the New Age is that there's so many things you can try. Like, let me try some crystals, and let me try some tarot and readings, and some yoga, and there's so many things you can try.
And artistic, and creative and spiritual art and artistic expression is all good. It's a little... you're seeing alive people. This is all new. This splash of color and all this was new back then. It would have been very, like, exciting and dangerous and all kinds of stuff. Yeah. But sometimes you see somebody that's, like, 80 and they still wearing, like, the same beads they had on when they were younger. And that's fine as long as they're not still saying the same thing that they were saying from years ago. Like, And that's... I don't even want to criticize that. I'm just saying there's freedom in being able to evolve. Yeah. And then whatever you evolve into, you will outgrow that too.
I feel like a new term has just arrived to me.
What's that?
And I want to coin it if no one's coined it yet. And it's called techno-spirituality. Because we might be moving into a technological spirituality movement that is completely new, that no one has seen before, where you use technology to, like, self-actualize yourself or do whatever it was talking about.
It is happening, and there you go. You coined
techno-spirituality.
Coined that term, and that is the case, because how many people are finding teachers online and listening to guided meditations online, even if through online they're like, listen, go to an actual ashram. You still found out about it online.
That's true.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So techno-spirituality,
For example, in 1988, the Indian guru Osho wrote, "You don't need any churches. You don't need any temples. You don't need any mosques. You need only a prayerful heart, a loving heart, a grateful heart. That will help you to discover not only yourself, but the very depths of this immense existence." so we can understand the emergent New Age movement of the 60s and 70s as a form of cultural criticism, reacting to the ideas and values which were perceived to have dominated Western culture since the advent of Christianity. Much of the New Age movement was framed as a counter to mainstream culture. The New Age of Aquarius versus the Old Piscean Age, individual spirituality versus church dogmatism, individual freedom versus social control. In many cases, scholars frame individuality and eclecticism as the defining factor of New Age spirituality, the eclectic mixing of astrology and manifestation practices, wearing symbols like the evil eye while espousing a fervent belief in the law of karma, or traveling to Thailand for tantric Sakyan tattoos, like what Angelina Jolie and Cara Delevingne have. Which brings us finally to the fourth major stream of New Age history, the rise and adaptation of Eastern religious traditions in the US. You might have noticed that a lot of the practice I've been mentioning so far derive from East and Southeast Asian religions. Practices like postural yoga, Indian Ayurvedic medicine, acupuncture, Reiki, various forms of meditation and visualization, and the belief in karma. Now, as far back as the 1800s, American esotericists like the Theosophists were incorporating ideas and practices from Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism long before they were cool. But the Americanization of Eastern religions really kicked into overdrive in the 1960s. In the late 1950s, Beat Generation authors like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg were introducing popular conceptions of Buddhism, Hinduism, and Taoism to American readers. Then in 1965, Congress passed the Immigration and Nationality Act, also known as the Hart-Celler Act. This law ended discrimination that had pretty much blocked immigration from non-Western countries. Since the 1920s, people from Asia had been barred from coming to the US, but now Asian immigrants could finally make the move, bringing religious beliefs and practices to a country that had little to no exposure to these ideas before. During the counterculture, celebrity spiritual teachers skyrocketed in popularity. For example, the Woodstock Festival was opened with a prayer from the Indian guru Swami Satchidananda. Other celebrity teachers included Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the founder of Transcendental Meditation, and D.T. Suzuki, a Japanese-American writer and scholar who translated the philosophies of Zen Buddhism for the masses. New Age leaders also popularized new religious movements inspired by Asian religions, like Hare Krishna. This blend of what we could call new ancient wisdom is a hallmark of New Age spirituality. Now, new ancient might sound contradictory, but scholars note that New Age religious ideas resonated with white Americans because they felt new, even though the ideas were actually hundreds or thousands of years old. Fueled by perennialist philosophy, American countercultural youth were fascinated by the perceived similarities between these traditions, regardless of their cultural origins. They believed that teachings from Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and indigenous traditions offered timeless insights that could be easily adapted to modern life. And what began with hippies in the 1960s went mainstream by the 1970s, thanks in part to pop culture. In 1968, the Beatles traveled to India to practice transcendental meditation, inspiring their experimental White Album. Jimi Hendrix decorated his guitar strap with tantric geometric designs called yantras, and Alice Coltrane began to mix jazz with Hindu devotional music. While the New Age of the 60s started as a countercultural movement of young people rebelling against the establishment, by the 80s the movement had become more mature, and along with maturity came commercialization. Many scholars see the New Age movement as a kind of spiritual marketplace of religious ideas, goods, and services. Seminars, meditation retreats, talismans, crystals, and at-home healing techniques transform spiritual seekers into consumers, and transform spiritual guides into ritual experts for hire. The scholar Guy Reddin even argues that commercial enterprises are the primary institutional form of the New Age movement, a network of festivals, publishing houses, magazines, therapy and retreat centers, and social media influencers. He writes, New Age activities are largely commodified in the fundamental fee-for-access sense. The scholar Margaretta Love points out that this means we can apply the same tools that economists use to study markets to study the New Age movement. For example, we see the phenomenon of product standardization. In order to appeal to the widest possible audience, practitioners and organizations align their offerings with broad New Age values and adopt common terminology. A meditation app, a yoga studio, and a manifesting influencer on Instagram might all deploy the same terminology, like mindfulness or energy, effectively standardizing spiritual commodities across the New Age marketplace. Dr. Love also notes that in this commercialized environment, numerous actors compete for resources, like memberships.
Okay, last stop before the end. Here was something that I was thinking about. You know, you could let yourself get all upset about the commercialization of some of this stuff and be like, man, I want to have some of these nice crystals and stones because they are ridiculously expensive. Like, I've been to some crystal shops and it's nutty how expensive even just the little rocks are, like $20 for a pebble.
They can be.
But here's the beauty about New Age spirituality is that you can turn anything into into something meaningful to yourself. It's just what you give it. You can go out into the woods and hunt for the most precious stone you can find and let it mean something to you. You don't have to pay tons of money for any of this stuff. You can buy a book on yoga and do yoga in your home by yourself. You don't have to go to a retreat. It could be fun to go to a retreat or do something, but if you're strapped for cash, the beauty I see kind of in some of this New Age spirituality is that you can do it yourself. You can make it be whatever you want it to be. I don't know. That's all I gotta say about that.
Yeah. I think it depends on what spirit you're possessed by at the time. Like, yeah, I totally agree in some sense that if you go out there and you get into this stuff and you're buying trinkets like crazy, if you're having fun, I don't want to spoil somebody's good time if that's where they're at, If they're in the stage where they're frequenting spiritual shops and they're buying breeds and they're growing their hair out and they're whatever they're doing. Yeah. Or just finding religion, or they're meticulous about poring over the Vedas or something like that and learning every single thing about a particular thing. And yeah, you're right. You could go do that. You could go, if that's the game you want to play, you could go fashion some sticks and stuff like that. But sometimes I wonder even about people that are getting straight to consciousness work, getting straight to talking about enlightenment. Which if you look at the root of most religions, it's like with Christianity, it's salvation. With, some of the Eastern ones, it's awakening or enlightenment or nirvana. If you look at another, what's in Islam, the hour of power. Yeah. This grand event or this hallmark shift or something. And I even think about Christianity, how they went to the upper room and they waited. They waited. There's this attitude of waiting, in the parable of the waiting for the bride waiting for the groom. Yeah. You wait for it. You wait. Yeah. And sometimes I wonder, even with people that are pretty direct about awakening. Yeah. And they're like, forget all the spiritual mumbo jumbo, set your trinkets and crystals and everything down for a second, and let's figure out who you are at the core. Yeah. Set aside practices, because sometimes people talk about practices and getting in the way. And the point I'm getting to is that even that with people that talk about direct awareness practices, if they're like, what, I don't even know if this is doing anything. Maybe in some instances, talking too much about it is the problem. Yeah. Pointing even is a problem, maybe. Or not a problem necessarily, but if it's just, is it possible that you could listen to one too many enlightenment videos and and you've now mired yourself in concepts about it when all you really needed to do was take a deep breath and stop thinking. And so that's where my mind goes with this stuff, is the
pointing about the distractive nature of it.
Point it's all fine, it's all relevant because that's what's there, that's what we're doing, this is what we're doing. But I always want to lead the compass back to the deeper, the root, the nugget, the truth of beyond truths. Because even if you regard Maslow's hierarchy of needs, transcendence is at the top. Yeah. And to me, I don't know for sure the exact meaning of transcendence, but it hints to me you've transcended. You've passed it. Yeah. You've discarded those things. The space rocket doesn't take the gas tank with it into space, unless Elon Musk's made some new one that does that. But a lot of times they discard, they break off because you don't want those weights of everything. Yeah. So some of this stuff, when it's fresh and it's new, it's fresh and it's new. But you got to pay for everything that's fresh and new. Eventually it becomes a husk you're dragging with you. And when the time comes to cut off your most treasured, the thing that even has spiritual significance to you, that can be a weight weighing you down. I would never cut this braid. I've been growing it for 20 years. Yeah. Cutting it is blasphemy. You can snip that sucker off. Shave your head. Shave your eyebrows off. You discard all of it and get in touch with the present where you go, oh, okay. All of this is detritus compared to being unfettered.
Subscribers, cultural legitimacy, and reputation. This competition leads to significant efforts to define and protect boundaries within the spiritual marketplace, ensuring that each actor maintains their unique position in a network of business competitors. Now, New Age ideas and practices have become so mainstream, it's tough to identify if a particular concept or practice is quintessentially New Age. In other words, over the course of about 15 years from the 60s into the 80s, by the time Out on a Limb aired on ABC, The New Age stopped being new. For starters, the baby boomers from the countercultural youth grew up and got jobs. They set aside their political fervor, but held on to the religious practices and vernacular from their New Age days. Even First Lady Nancy Reagan famously relied on her personal astrologer to help make decisions for President Ronald Reagan. By the 1980s, accumulating wealth was also often seen as a sacred spiritual achievement, an example of manifesting abundance. Scholars trace this phenomenon to the human potential movement and similar psychologically rooted groups like the Erhard Seminars training. These movements promoted the idea that personal growth and success were not just possible, but a sign of spiritual alignment and inner power. We see this play out today on social media with self-help manifesting influencers. Many other concepts that grew out of the spiritual boom of the 60s and 70s, like energy, auras, consciousness, and the collective nervous system, also found themselves transformed into vehicles for accruing wealth. The scholar Elizabeth Mickelson, for example, has outlined how the New Age concept of energy has been associated with money as a flowing and magnetic force. The author Shakti Gawain, who I mentioned earlier, associated money with a magnetic energy, almost like the magnetic fluid of Franz Anton Mesmer centuries ago. Because New Age beliefs and practices are not new anymore, but deeply ingrained in popular holistic health and therapeutic practices, many scholars have advocated for doing away with the idea of the New Age altogether. Also because it's become something of a pejorative term, a catch-all term for weird stuff. Ultimately, there's no official doctrine or definition of the New Age, and it's subject to our imprecise and changing notions of what constitutes it. But several historical streams joined in the 1960s that sparked something, a movement that made Shirley MacLaine's miniseries possible. Watching that conversation between Shirley and David, we can identify the marks of new thought, with Shirley exhibiting the power of positive thinking and the divinity of the self, as she chants the affirmation, "I am God." We see the perennialist philosophy of Western esotericism, as David shares that the old masters of the world's religions were teaching the same universal truth. And we see the anti-dogmatism of the American counterculture and the Americanization of Eastern religions as David excoriated the church for suppressing the belief in reincarnation and karma. The sociologist Robert Wuthnow theorized that the 1960s and the decades that followed marked a major shift in the American religious landscape. A shift from a spirituality of dwelling, where people stick with predetermined communities like churches or synagogues, to a spirituality of seeking, which was all about individual exploration and experimentation. Today, this seeking approach is pretty much the norm. More and more Americans now move between religious traditions, leaving the ones they grew up with, opting out of religion altogether, or identifying as spiritual but not religious, becoming spiritual seekers instead of religious dwellers.
So, shout out to Religion for Breakfast. That was an awesome video. I learned so much, and it really did a fantastic job of kind of like putting all those pieces together, because it is pretty scattered. Right? When you go looking for like, what is New Age spirituality all about? You get, first of all, you get inundated with feeds and stuff of people that have like, I've left the New Age spirituality. Like there's a lot of people that like who returned to Christianity who got involved with New Age spirituality. So you got to like bypass all that to find anyone give like just a unbiased, view of what is New Age spirituality. So yeah, there's very, very little unbiased content.
What happened to Shirley? What was her name? Shirley MacLaine?
I don't know.
It'd be interesting to see over time how many people stuck with New Age spirituality, that would be an interesting set of statistics. Is religion-wise, who sticks with it in their entire life?
But that's the thing about New Age spirituality. Most people who would be put into that camp wouldn't be like, I'm a New Ager. I'm in part of New Age. Most people, that they just doing their own thing. They're doing their own. It's kind of like a individual spiritual practice. You're just like grabbing whatever you like. It seems to be like taking whatever things that you're attracted to and doing it. It's not really like they don't stamp themselves with the label of like, I'm part of New Age spirituality. At least that's what it seems like. Yeah. That's why it's so hard. There's no New Age Bible.
Right. But I'm curious as to going from the description that we just were explained about New Age spirituality explained, like they just explained it to us.
Yeah.
Going by that, I'm interested in the evolution, because there's clips of Jim Carrey when he's younger, and he was into the law of attraction. He was like, I wrote a check for myself for this much money, and then like a couple of years later, I got it.
Yeah.
And then you skip a few more years, and then he put out this like documentary where he's like, Jim Carrey doesn't exist, or who's Jim Carrey? And he talks about all the masks he's worn along with the mask.
Yeah.
And he became a student of Eckhart Tolle in some ways. And then I saw him talking, and he's like, I'm everything, man. I'm the crackhead on the corner. I'm this and that, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
And further, and like, there's a development that you see. There's something too when people are in the realm of like, I am receiving now, receiving to me, I'm receiving.
Yeah.
And I understand needing to receive if you don't have. You got to figure out how to get if you don't have. But upon the getting, a peculiar thing happens sometimes. You get and you get, or you don't get. You're like, this shit doesn't fucking work. How many people? That's one extraordinary story. You telling me on the entire billions of people on the planet, you don't have a couple of extraordinary stories where like they precisely got what they wanted?
Yeah.
What about all the people that are like, I did those law of attraction things with full belief in my heart for years and I didn't get what I wanted. In fact, I got something different.
Yeah.
And then the evolution from all these lessons to somewhere where somebody like, this is odd. This one here seems to be okay with no matter what they get. Like that Bible verse where he talks about, I've learned to become content with much and I've learned to become content with little. Yeah. It's regardless, how did the Buddha really live? Yeah. Because that's an aspect of this. How did some of these teachers of these things actually live in their day-to-day life?
Yeah.
Were they detached from having stuff that, conjuring with crystals and conjuring with all that? Be aware of yourself, for God's sake. Be aware of your desire to have or make a good final point.
Yeah.
You must have highest point. Justin, what are you doing? Shush up a little bit. Just let it be.
Yeah. Let's end it there on let it be. Good. It seems to suit it, actually. If you guys liked our reaction on this, please don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, share this with a friend, and everyone till next time,
stay spiritual.